Okay, so this is the footage that was released for this new God of War or what have you, which comes out next month on April 20th, I believe. I'm not, be fully honest, I lost all interest in this game when they announced it at E3, due to the fact that there's no element of the game that reminds me of the older God of War games. It just seems very thrown together and very random compared to what I was expecting when they first announced this, before they showed gameplay for this particular title. One of the things that I really just don't like that they've done here is the fact that the game developers have essentially taken multiple elements from other games and they have thrown those elements together haphazardly. Like, it just seems extremely patched together to a point where it doesn't remind me of the God of War of old. It's just very once again random, and I'm not exactly sure, the audience for this, because it seems like their target audience is almost to a point where it seems to be like they made a game for people who did not like God of War to begin with. Starting with things like the combat system. One of the things is that I really don't like. It doesn't look like God of War. First of all, they've taken out the jump mechanic, so you can't jump in the game. And that was one of the best parts about God of War to begin with, is the fact that the air combat was so fluid and so responsive. And they've completely taken that out. They've stripped it out of the game. So now you can no longer jump, which is one of the things that I really dislike. Another thing about the combat system is the fact that the brutality aspect of it just seems to be completely missing, to a fault, where it no longer seems to be that rated M title that God of War is supposed to be. And the brutality aspect of the older games is actually one of the things that attracted people to the series to begin with. It's one of the things, one of the most defining aspects of the franchise itself. So to see it gone, just completely missing in this game, is it seems to be a huge mistake to me. Like, when you slash at enemies now, instead of, like, they got some blood in there that I saw in this gameplay video, this new footage that they release, but it's in small bursts, and it's like very bright, like it looks cartoonish. Mostly when you hack at enemies, this orange goo or whatever the hell it is, spurts out of the enemies, and it just once again it loses that realistic aspect. It loses the brutality of the combat system, and on top of that, it makes Kratos seem much weaker and more frail compared to what he was before, and I'll get more into that later. But another aspect that I don't like is the HUD. they've added, they've pretty much made this God of War an RPG, and I have a big issue with that. Like when, I'm looking at a boss fight right now, and the problem is you have this big, huge, intruding health bar on the screen, and I don't have a problem with that in other games, but God of War, didn't have, those intrusive HUD elements in the older games, and it gave it a more realistic feel to it when you're actually playing the game. It made it more, I don't know, it just made it more, the immersion factor was improved because of that. That was one of the best defining aspects. They even got button prompts for the platforming elements in here that don't need to be there, and these are elements that weren't there in the older games. And I really don't like that. This is the direction that Sony Santa Monica felt that they needed to go, because they didn't need to put in those elements. The older games worked just fine without health bars above every single enemy you encounter in the game. They worked just fine without having button prompts during the platforming sections of the game. They worked just fine without having health bars during boss fights. So it has that RPG feel, and the big issue with that, some people may not have a problem with that, but the big issue with that is that it makes God of War seem like every other game out there, because every other game, it seems to be doing that. Every modern single player game seems to be an RPG of some sort. And they had, that's not if the older God of War games were old and were getting old and stale and formulaic, those games not being RPGs weren't part of what the problem of the franchise was, and they didn't need to put those elements in there. Another thing that I really don't like is the camera. The camera it's up on your ass the entire fucking game. It's so close up on you. And then the problem with that is it distorts your view to a very specific point. So you can't really see what's to the left of you or to the right of you. You have to constantly move the camera around. And the older games weren't like that. The camera was, from a wide perspective, it was in the background, so you can see exactly what was around you at every corner. And when you're in combat, you don't need to turn the camera, because the camera showed you where everything was. You didn't really need to mess with the camera like that. But it's so to the point where it's like they're trying to make it an overly cinematic experience. The thing is, God of War was already a cinematic, experience. But now, because of games like The Last of Us, which I'm going to mention again, and this whole thing of Sony trying to make a lot of their exclusives more like these rejected student film projects, they're just video games trying to be movies. Because of that whole thing, which has gotten popular this console generation for some reason, Sony Santa Monica, I guess whoever's in charge over there, they felt that, this is the direction that we need to take our franchise, because this is what's popular now in the industry. We can't just have a traditional, action, hack and slash experience without all the RPG elements and whatnot. Now we got to start messing with the camera and whatnot. And they, once again, this is something that wasn't an issue before in the older games. So why change it? You know, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And that's an issue that I have with this new God of War, or at least another issue that I have with it. Another thing is the axe that they gave Kratos. The axe has this Captain America shield boomerang effect, where, and they made it a mechanic where you throw it and, you know, it'll stick to something, or, you know, it'll strike an enemy and then you press it again and then it comes back to you. That to me is very cartoonish, and it's very silly, and it kind of takes me out of the experience. The Blades of Chaos, or the Blades of Athena, or whatever, you know, the older blades, the older dual blades that Kratos had in the older games, you know, which changed names depending on what game of the franchise you were playing. You know, those are Kratos, that's his signature weapons. You know, so to completely get rid of those in favor of this boring looking thing with the dumb, you know, mechanic like the boomerang effect, just is, to me, it's you know, I'm left dumbfounded by, once again, I don't know what the thought process was behind that. But, you know, getting rid of the blades for something so generic like a basic axe is just beyond me. I don't get it. I really don't get it. Then you have the stronger enemies like these in the game. And, you know, the combat system is already limited because they've taken out, once again, they've taken out the air combat. They've taken out the jump mechanic. The camera is limited, so that means your movement is limited. And, you know, with enemies like those, you know, the basic approach would be to spam the shield, because, you know, they're like the harder enemies, or the more challenging enemies in Dark Souls. You know, when you encounter an enemy that will not allow you to spam attacks, then you just start spamming your defensive options. You know, and in those games, that's the dodge roll mechanic, or whatever. You just start spamming that. You know, throw a few counterattacks, and it's simple. You know, it's not, the gameplay doesn't have any serious depth to it. So, you know, and this is the same way, where you spam the shield, you throw off a counterattack, you dodge a little bit, and that's it. It's a very casual, simplified experience. And actually, you know, the problem with the combat, you know, that's the problem with the combat right there, is the fact that it looks exactly like, because of the way the camera is set up, it looks exactly like Hellblade. It doesn't look like a God of War game. It looks exactly like Hellblade, like a more ramped up version of that, slightly faster version of that. And that's an issue because, once again, you know, it doesn't look like God of War. It doesn't look like anything that the older games did. And then they have, you know, they go so far with the RPG mechanic, you know, with this right here, where you stop at a merchant and, you know, you can upgrade your weapons. It has weapon crafting. You can change your armor, and it's like in the older God of War games, when I encountered, you know, when Kratos encountered a piece of armor or whatever, it gave him an extra ability. Now, you know, it's all about increasing, you know, your health and your defense, and the strength and durability of your weapons, which, once again, makes that's a problem, because it makes it like every other game that's out there, every other modern single-player game. And to me, as an older fan of the franchise, I find it insulting that, they felt that they had the dumb God of War down to a point where it's it's like everything else, and it loses because they've completely abandoned the identity of what the series was in what it's supposed to be. Now it resembles so many different other things, and that's why older fans are complaining about this. That's why there are people such as myself who aren't liking what they're seeing, because it resembles everything else but God of War. It's The Last of Us with the camera and the stupid kid following you around the entire game, stopping at walls and murals, and so I have to be forced to look at that to appreciate the artistic aspect that the developers put into the game, when it wasn't like that before. Things like that were hidden in the background as Easter eggs. Now I have to actually stop at them and listen to this stupid kid with the piss poor voice acting explain to me why this is important, this random wall or this random mural in the environment. So it's The Last of Us in that aspect. It's Dark Souls with the controls. Now attack is mapped to the shoulder buttons and all this other nonsense. It's Hellblade with the combat, the way you move and the way the camera moves while you're in combat. It's every other fucking game except God of War, and that's the big issue that I have with this. And it's also the reason why I have zero interest in buying this. I'm not buying this game. Just to be clear, I'm not interested in purchasing it. It looks very, very dumbed down, and it looks like a huge backstep from the older games in so many different ways. If anything, I might rent this through GameFly or something, spend $15 or whatever, and play it. But another thing is, when the game developers came out and said that this game could be like, I think it was like up to 40 hours or some shit, and the series was never supposed to be that. You buy in the past, you buy a God of War game, you spend 10 to 12 hours playing it, and you got one of the best experiences on the console, one of the best gaming experiences out there. Now I got to spend 40 hours, doing what you do in every other modern single player game with the RPG aspect, and it's just trash to me. But anyway, that's my opinion on the new God of War. I'm not impressed, and I could skip it, to be honest. So there it is.